There you go. Does that make it any better? Now you can hear me. I apologise. There you go. I should start all that again. Thanks, Vince. Well, thanks for trying to alert me at the very least. Yeah, I'm running two different microphone systems tonight, and I had one of them muted, so that doesn't help. I beg your pardon. So, I want to thank the big fish. That's what this was all about. Yes, your hats have turned up, brother. Thank you very much. And one of the great folks I had the pleasure of hanging very closely with up in Rockhampton recently. So fabulous to catch up with him. And thanks for your gifts, mate. And I'll make sure that the other head intended will find one of those. A very happy home, I am sure. All right, so now we are sorted. There is a bit of noise coming out of the appropriate holes, which is always a pleasure. Tonight, I want to touch on a few things that, while seem in isolation quite separate, but together, when you view at them and you actually understand what they're all meaning, I believe, do indicate a great deal of truth to the things that we believe. I'm going to start with, I guess, a little bit of news to begin with, or at least it's not news. It is something they are definitely trying to hold back from us at the moment. News like this. Journalists are asking Ukrainian soldiers to hide their Nazi patches. Now, the New York Times admits this. It has been forced, very, very belatedly, to deal with something that's been known around the independent news media for a long time, that these fake news, mainstream media, are curating their shots, making sure that they don't shoot anything they shouldn't that could give substance to a conspiracy theory, and they have been caught out. So they are just one of a number. I think Washington Post, LA Times, there were a couple of others involved in that too. So interesting, that is starting to get out now. Zero Hedge is a fairly widely read tome, and more people are talking about it. In fact, there's a lot of stuff going on today in Telegram from various different sides. A lot of news. I see somebody mentioned in the chat very quickly. I haven't got there yet. I should pop in and say hello. Hello to everybody. Somebody mentioned today that Mel Gibson's going to be making an announcement. There's been a lot of chatter behind the scenes about Mel Gibson. He's been heavily involved with Tim Blanchard, and there is a movie, real-time movie, or real-life movie that has been made. I suspect Mel Gibson is behind that. Jim Caviezel is probably involved with that as well. That movie is apparently going to be released sooner rather than later. I'm talking days to a week rather than weeks to a month. So you might have seen on your social media photos of Mel Gibson in a helicopter wearing an interesting sort of hat. That is the organisation that Blanchard runs that goes around saving kids, and a magnificent operation that it is too. It's a doco on child trafficking, and once it's out, I think it's going to blow a number of things wide open, including the involvement of the US government. It's, well, not just the US government, but probably all governments, because they've all had to be involved in some way, shape, or form for a crime of this magnitude to be able to exist. So g'day to everybody who I haven't said g'day to yet. Bradley, nice to see you in. The Khazarians, yep, you're all about that. Evening, Mick. Paul, nice to see you in too. Alan's in. Maria, Neville, Daryl, Baz, Daniel Weir's in. DM's in. Jorel, we've got Jay. You know, the last time, Jorel. Now, wasn't there a character out of Game of Thrones named something? Oh, Jorah, that wasn't it? Evening, Dan Tilders. Nice to hear you speaking, or at least you've got your microphone out. Oh, that was me. You telling me I had no sound. Thank you to everybody who told me I had no sound. That was really good. I wasn't on the bloody chat screen at the time. I did save a couple of comments that I did see. Thank you, Char. I will have a look at this. I only got this just before we came on air, but there is a tremendous fight back going on. I wanted to actually try and talk to David about that further last night, but our time was limited. My understanding is that the Maori are bringing charges against New Zealand politicians and they are serious crimes against humanity charges, and they will be heard inside the Maori court. Now, that's a long and involved history, which I'm not going to go and get into because I probably am going to screw it up at some point. Suffice to say, I probably know a little bit more about Maori history than I do our Australian Aboriginal history, which is sadly an admission I would prefer not to make. But it all has a lot to do with the Waitangi Treaty. It all has a lot to do with the fact that the Maori were never conquered by any country or any nation or any empire, and the fact that they signed an agreement that let the white man come and live there on the proviso that they understood that the Maori owned the land, it was still their land. That made them sovereign, okay, and has kept them sovereign. Their agreement has kept them sovereign. And so there are Maori courts, and it's my understanding that some very senior people in New Zealand are being brought before those courts on crimes against humanity charges, and death penalty can apply. So interesting news out of that, and that there are a number of complicit people we are led to believe will be fronting those courts. Jacinda Ardern would be at the top of that list, one would suspect. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you've got there, Chara. Maybe that's got something to do with that. Mr. Shroon or Mrs. Hoon, I'm not sure which way to say that, but I love the way you're thinking. Sitting down, having a beer, waiting patiently for 6:30. Toxic was, here you go. There you go. Toxic was talking about this documentary that's being made with Mel Gibson's involvement. I am absolutely sure. And right now, if you don't mind a warm space to be, that's what I'm going to say. Dave O is just getting one pirate juice happening. So it's only a stage one. It will cook for a little while, I dare say. So good on you, Dave. I hope you go well with that. Won't even get a taste. Cough, splutter. All right, so let's get into this a little further. I wanted to talk about the TGA. Now, my very first show, some of you will have been very lucky not to have been exposed to that, but my very first show was with two wonderful people. Well, one wonderful person, one I'm still not quite sure about, but Sally Olsen, who at the time was representing the pilots and the air stewardesses who were being sacked or told or coerced or pushed into getting the appropriate squirting thing, and one fella called Graham Hood. Now, during that conversation, I'm going to play you a small part of it here. I showed them exactly where the TGA admitted that what we had was a clinical trial, which is another word for medical experiment. You've heard me talk about medical experiments before and subjecting yourself to one of those. So let's just go back and have a look at what I showed them. This is actually show number 1 from a few years ago.
And as in the first paragraph, as part of the government's response to the review of medicines and medical device regulation, we are implementing a pathway for provisional registration for prescription medicines. Approval through provisional pathway will be on the basis of preliminary clinical data where there is potential for a substantial benefit to Australian patients. But if you go back to the other main page where we started at safety information, but in the paragraph and 2 underneath it, it says, all COVID-19 vaccine applications are being treated with the greatest priority as part of the Department of Health's response to the pandemic. Under normal circumstances, TGA's assessment for both provisional and general registration begins once all information to support registration is available. For COVID-19 vaccines, the TGA has agreed to accept rolling data to enable early evaluation of the data that comes to hand. Many of the large-scale clinical trials that will provide the evidence of safety and effectiveness are still progressing, and these results will be provided to the TGA as they become available.
Okay, so they had plainly hidden it on the TGA website that the auspices of what they were doing were running a clinical trial on the entire population of Australia, and that the TGA, and bear in mind, it's a couple of years ago now, the TGA had decided without any sort of approval to go ahead and make these determinations, which then influenced government, or at least supported, I should say, not influenced, supported the government propaganda rhetoric. All right. So now I want to show you something else. Now, one of the really interesting things that I think people have spoken a lot about, but have yet to fully appreciate, is the Nuremberg Code. So let's have a look here. Let me put it up here where I can read it and you can see it as well. Let's have a look at the Nuremberg Code. Now, this is out of the British Medical Journal. The introduction says, the judgment by the War Crimes Tribunal in Nuremberg laid down 10 standards to which physicians must conform when carrying out experiments on human subjects in a new code that is now accepted worldwide. Bear in mind, this code was enacted in 1947, and this is a version that was reproduced in 1996. And this code came out of the Nuremberg trials, of which there were many, but there were two separate sorts of trials. There was a general trial, and that was for officers and enlisted men who were charged with war crimes. The secondary trials were of doctors and medical support personnel, and 7 of those doctors wound up being hanged by the neck until dead in 1947, based on the egregious breaches of human rights that they knowingly committed. Now, it could be argued that at the time there was no Nuremberg Code for them to abide by. However, there was something along these lines already being worked for and had been basically agreed to worldwide and was being enacted on at the time worldwide. It was an oath of sorts, all tied in with the Hippocratic Oath. And this is merely an extension, really, of what, or an official handing down of what doctors would need to adhere to and need to be mindful of when it comes to the Nuremberg Code. So this judgment established a new standard of ethical medical behavior for the post-World War II human rights era. Among other requirements, this document enunciates the requirement of voluntary informed consent of the human subject. Voluntary informed consent of the human subject. It is the requirement. Okay? Now, bear that in mind. The principle of voluntary informed consent protects the right of the individual to control his/her own body. This code also recognizes that the risk must be weighed against the expected benefit, that the unnecessary pain and suffering must be avoided. So the doctor needs to take into account, for instance, if you are presenting to him with your leg mostly cut off or bitten off or whatever, he needs to decide at the time there and then whether or not it's better to cut your leg off and throw it away, try and save what's left and save your life, or whether he should try and save the leg and you, in which case there's a good chance the leg might die and so might you. These are the decisions doctors may have to make, and that's a very basic way of trying to explain that. The code also recognizes that the risk must be weighed against the expected benefit that unnecessary pain and suffering must avoid. So the code must be weighed against whether or not the person who loses the leg is going to be suffering unnecessary pain going forward, or if by keeping the leg they would have been in greater pain for a longer period. The code recognizes that doctors should avoid actions that injure human patients. But if you are a surgeon and you take a scalpel to a piece of human skin, you are injuring it. But there is a risk, a calculated risk, that the doctors must be aware of when they make these decisions. The principles established by this code of medical practice now have been extended into general codes of medical ethics. Now, the permissible medical experiments. This is the Nuremberg Code. There are 10 parts to the Nuremberg Code. This was established, as I say, in 1947. Permissible medical experiments. The great weight of the evidence before us to the effect that certain types of medical experiments on human beings, when kept within reasonably well-defined bounds, conform to the ethics of the medical profession generally. The protagonists of the practice of human experimentation justify their views on the basis that such experiments yield results for the good of society that are unprocurable by other methods or means of study. All agree, however, basic principles must be observed in order to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. Number one, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Full stop. Period. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. All right? Without the intervention of any element of force, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him or her to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, that's you, there should be made known to him or her the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment. Were you told that you were going to be part of an experiment, or the nature of it? The method and the means by which it will be conducted. All inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come for his or her participation in the experiment. This is the good bit. The duty and responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It is a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated with impunity. So that means that the doctor can't abdicate their responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent that the person has, because they are the one initiating, directs or engages in the experiment. They're sticking the thing in. So, yes, it is their personal responsibility and duty, and it cannot be delegated to another with duty. So they cannot say, oh, look, the government made me do it. That doesn't work. Oh, APRA made me do it. APRA said we had to. That is no excuse. If you are a doctor or a nurse, I would be extremely worried. You have broken the first law in the Nuremberg Code. And that is a key one, because everybody, aside from the complete lemmings, everybody took that jab as something they had to have if they wanted their life to go back to the new normal. It was only 2 weeks. It was then one jab, then 2, then 3. Now we're up to 6. And there are still lemmings out there holding their arm out who believe they know they have given consent. But have they given, under the standings of this agreement, voluntary consent? And do they really understand what they are consenting to? And that responsibility for the patient to understand what they are consenting to is the duty and responsibility for the person or the individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. That's the people at the pointy end, No pun intended. Anyway, up to number 2. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary by nature. I think there is a significant argument could be made that a lot of what's happened was not random and unnecessary. Well, was random and unnecessary in nature. Very unnecessary in nature. The experiment should be so designed and based on the results of animal experimentation. Well, we know what happened to the animals. They all died. And a knowledge of the natural history of the disease. Well, at that time, the natural history of the disease, we were being told, came out of a wet market in Wuhan. We now know very differently that it didn't come out of a wet market in Wuhan. It was created. And it was created and weaponized by what looks to be a group of Americans involved with deep staters. The other problem under study is that the anticipated results justify the performance of the experiment. So you would expect under the study that anticipated results justify the performance of the experiment. Well, that's what they tried to do. They tried to say that, yes, if you follow us in this experiment, it'll justify because nobody will get COVID anymore. That didn't happen, did it? Didn't happen at all like that. The experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. Well, they would argue potentially that they've done all of that, but they certainly didn't alleviate mental suffering and unnecessary injury. Well, hasn't the government opened up a vax compensation webpage now where if you have been hurt in any way, shape or form, you can apply for compensation? No experiment should be conducted where there is a priori reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur. What happened to those rats? Except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects. All right, so there could be an argument raised that many physicians held their arm out for this thing and have been fully jammed, and they didn't know much about it either. They just did what they were told by the agency that told them to do it. So no help there. Number 6, the degree of risk to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. Where was the humanitarian importance to solve a cold? A common cold. Well, until they started attenuating it, as they do. Number 7, proper preparation should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. I remind you once again, what happened to the rats? Even those experiments were thin on the ground, extremely dodgy. And we now, with the benefit of hindsight and what's been able to come out to us in the last couple of years, we now know there was no serious investigations. There were no facilities. They knew exactly what was going to happen. And, the only thing you've got to prepare for with what their projected result was is a few more cold rooms and a good excavator. Number 8, the experiment should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons. I think that could be questioned in some regards. It's certainly at the coalface, so to speak. The highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages of the experiment of those who conduct or engage in the experiment. Now, this is a very interesting line. I reckon that the highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages. Now, we know that the folks that collapsed at the jab sites and started doing the funky chicken or dead ant on the ground were those folks who were injected and they missed the fatty part of the muscle or wherever they were aiming for and actually got it into a blood vein, an artery. And we know that then causes the liquid to course around through the blood, and the little things that are in that fluid that they put in there act like little razor blades in a train that run around through your circulatory system and cut people up. And that's where the blood clots began also. So there you go. There's probably a breach there. During the course, number 9, during the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to be impossible. Well, I guess you could argue that we are now at that point, but for the last few years we've been struggling to get to that point, and we were told we were never going to get to that point. And in fact, they are still making the argument in mainstream media that you should still race out, get jabbed at your earliest opportunity. Number 10, during the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage if he has probable cause to believe in the exercise of good faith, superior skill, and careful judgment required of him that a continuation of the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death to the experimental subject. What is our TGA doing? What is AHPRA doing? They are both in breach of that. So that is the 10 principles, if you like, of the Nuremberg Code from 1947. I think we can probably agree that there have been a number of egregious breaches in exactly some of the most serious areas of this particular debate. I don't think there can be any denial that there are questions and people who need to front courts or tribunals, because breaches of the Nuremberg Code are now heard before tribunals. They are not heard in local civil courts. The Nuremberg Code is above law. To try and explain that is probably a little difficult, but it is an all-encompassing agreement to humanity after the atrocities of World War II were discovered, investigated, and dealt with. And there will be still people alive today who remember those 7 doctors being hanged by the neck until dead in 1947. There may well be people in Nuremberg, still living in Nuremberg, who were there. Now, a public hanging, even in 1947, was not something that you would ordinarily expect. But this was done so that faith could be restored in the medical fraternity. And they got the 7 who committed or authored or authorized the greatest atrocities committed against humans during the Second World War, and strung them up in public as a sign to those following. Don't mess with this code. Don't mess with the Nuremberg Code. Well, as is so apt in this day and age, many new young people have come along and gained a few years, got a little bit wiser, got a little bit smarter, and the Nuremberg Code has worked very well up until, well, probably the last 30-odd years, when it was begun to be usurped. And clearly now governments feel they can get away with whatever they like, and the WHO certainly feels they can get away with whatever they like. But there is still the Nuremberg Code. Yes, I agree. We need someone to enforce it. Isn't that the problem that we have? Ergo, we have a white hats argument, a white hat side that we can all barrack and face for. And I truly do believe that the white hats are holding military tribunals. Now, I call them white hats because that's the easiest way to identify them. I could call them Trump, Trump's team or whatever. I think it's much bigger than Donald John Trump. I think it's much, much bigger than just him. And that's why it's best to say a team. And I think that team is working together with a world alliance, a global alliance for humanity. And that team is working in conjunction with some very special agencies involved with the United States of America. There is a lot of talk that in the next week or so we are going to see a heap of UFO exposure. Dr. Stephen Greer is due to come out and speak to Congress about UFO and prior exposure, and further information. I've been watching over the last couple of days various different documentaries about some very interesting exposés on flying saucers that have been captured or at least known of since the 1800s. I thought Roswell was the first time we ever actually caught one, but it doesn't seem to be that is the case. This technology may have been around a lot longer. Interestingly, in the last couple of hours, last 24, 48 hours or so, a US intelligence officer has come out and become a whistleblower. Now, I think that might be a strong term. This whistleblower, let's call him, has come out and described a international group that has agents based in every country to go out and retrieve downed UFOs. The military are versed in how to down a UFO if the opportunity is presented, and apparently there is a way to do it. You've got to train to do it. It's not an easy thing to do, but if they do manage to pull it off, it will bring down the UFO, and then these teams sweep in and recover everything, all the debris and whatever was inside. And of course, they look after any civilian organizations or individuals who may have got close to that website or got close to that crash site, including eliminating them. And there has been a lot of comment recently and a lot of video come out about a CIA assassin who died some years ago now, but prior to his death made a video recording where he admitted to killing Bob Marley and explained how he gave Bob Marley cancer. That Bob Marley was the only person that he'd murdered that he felt, any kind of, sorry for, because he liked Bob's music, thought he was a good guy and was doing good things for humanity. But that was exactly the problem. The CIA couldn't have Bob Marley and the power of his music rising up in opposition to what they were planning. So they decided that they would give him cancer. It's one of the wonderful little things that have come out recently. So the Nuremberg Code is not to be trifled with, and I would tell you that I would be one of the first people in line for the trial of the board members of APRA when that military tribunal happens. And I do, as I say, believe military tribunals are the go. Sidney Powell, I believe, will have a lot to do with those military tribunals. I also have a sneaking suspicion that there will be one former congressman who is also involved in those military tribunals. He was a former attorney general for his state and a very eloquent congressman, particularly when questioning Hillary Clinton. And of course, I'm talking about Trey Gowdy. He disappeared off the face of the earth just as his star was on the rise at a meteoric pace, and just disappeared, resigned, got out of Congress, and disappeared off I'm going back to private practice. Well, everybody left him at that. But I believe his private practice was to update and upgrade his skills so that he possessed similar qualifications to Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell was the only lawyer in America able to prosecute civil, criminal, and military tribunals. So civil and criminal courts and military tribunals, and that is key. I think Trey Gowdy went and did the same qualification, and I believe he will be one of the prosecutors that we will see when those trials are eventually shown to us. Now, why are we going to see trials? Well, we're probably, I believe, going to see trials because many people, we say, well, we're in a war, and we really are in a war, and nobody seems to understand the normies that we are in the war, much less many of us can explain why or how we are in this war. it all comes down to executive orders. And I'm sure many of you will be aware of Derek Johnson, former US Marine, who has got an encyclopedic knowledge of the United States Military Code of Conduct and all laws pertaining to military symbolism and propriety in, well, what's going on at the moment. And that is continuation of government. Now, continuation of government is very different to government. And it seems that continuation of government was put into effect on the 17th of July 2017. I don't really want to get into that one tonight, but I do want to get into explaining a little bit about executive orders and what executive orders mean. An executive order can be issued from any sitting president. They are usually issued to make, sweeping changes in certain areas of legislation or policy, but are also used for things like declarations of emergency. If the government, if the president wants to make the Congress and the Senate aware that there is an emergency that they need to act upon straight away, then a US president will write an executive order that will go to the Congress and be put before them, where you would think they would do something about it, because after all, it is an executive order. All right. Well, Executive Order 13848 is a very, very significant order. And I'm going to let Derek Johnson explain it.
Down Executive Order 13848 because I think it's the most monumental piece of paper since the Declaration of Independence on the federal government side of things. All right, you have to understand that national emergencies in executive orders were not supposed to be passed down from president to president. The whole point of a national emergency, first off, is exactly what it says: a national emergency. An emergency. All right, national emergencies and executive orders were not supposed to be drug out 20, 25, 30 years. All right, it's not what was intended. That shows you nothing but a federal corporation, which the United States, the federal corporation, the Organic Act of 1871, put us under the crown. All right, the bar was established, British Accreditation Registry in the 1870s. 1889, Stoutenberg versus Hennick outlines how D.C., District of Columbia, is a foreign territory. And 28 U.S. Code 3002 outlines how the United States is a federal corporation. All right. That is not a constitutional republic. So we've been living under a federal corporation for many, many, many years. It's not our faults in one way, but we can clean it up, and that is what's taking place. So Executive Order 13848 declared a national emergency, and it was for voter fraud. All right. Election interference, as Boss Man says all the time, President Trump. Election interference, election interference. He repeats it over and over on Truth. All right, so you have to understand that this national emergency in this executive order would not benefit Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. whatsoever. It would not benefit him with what has taken place and what has been accused of him and Hillary and all of the swamp. It would not benefit Joe Biden whatsoever for him, if he was real, to extend that national emergency in executive order, which has been extended to September 2023. It's been extended twice, 2 times in a row. All right, Executive Order 13848 specifically says in it, although no foreign power has altered the outcome or vote tabulation in any United States election, all right, it specifically null and voids my vote, your vote, the state's vote, and also January the 6th. And it says in any United States election. It doesn't say 1 or 2. It says in any United States election that none of these has happened. Okay? It didn't say domestic, though, which is the deep state, the swamp, the rhinos, the dinos. All right? The swamp. They're draining the swamp. Right? That was not just some rah-rah little slogan that Donald Trump came up with. Then you got to understand what that means, though. And look at this, how brilliant it is. Donald John Trump signed this on September the 12th, 2018. That's 2 months before any election under Donald John Trump. 2 years before the presidential election of 2020. That means the only evidence that they would have had of voter fraud on any level was 2016 and prior. But this has everything to do with the Dominion systems, the swamp and the deep state who add votes and delete votes. All right? Once you get that, it's going to click. The key line in Executive Order 13848 says, although no foreign power has altered the outcome or vote tabulation in any United States election. All right, that means my vote and your vote, meaning alter the outcome, or vote tabulation cancels out January the 6th. January 6th was a perfect setup by the military. When you understand we're under a continuity of government, which is outlined in federal continuity directives, starting January 17, 2017, and it tells you inside of it to start with that one, that anything before that is canceled. And the most recent issue was April 2023, and inside of it, it says consistent with Executive Order 13961, which is Donald Trump's order from December the 7th, 2020, which is a federal mission resilience strategy. It shows you we're under a COG, all right, which means the Constitution is put on pause and the military is in control under military occupancy, which is found in the Law of War Manual, which was issued June 12, 2015. All right, that's why the Military Justice Act is so important of 2016, passed in 2017, because it separates military laws from civil. All right, it separates president from commander-in-chief and commander-in-chief from Article 3 of the Constitution, which is the federal government. All right, that's why that's so important. So, on January the 6th, 2021, conveniently after 2 objections, the quote-unquote insurrection took place. All right, that was not an insurrection. This was all planned. This is the military exposing the swamp, the deep state, because in our Constitution, in the codes, 3 U.S. Code 15, it tells you what was supposed to happen when those objections took place. That did not happen because a quote-unquote insurrection took place, all right? When they came back in, they just rushed right on through the vote counts for the states. They didn't go to a special chamber, which they were supposed to do, go read through 3 U.S. Code 15. So Congress, the swamp, the rhinos, the dinos, they broke 18 U.S. Code 2381, 2384, 2385, and 52 U.S. Code 20511. All right? It's all outlined there. It's very clear what happened. It's a military occupancy. It's a continuity of government, and they are draining the swamp. That executive order traps all governors, attorney generals, secretary of states, judges, and lawyers who do not uphold or apply the laws that were put into place. All right? So they chose what side of the line they were on. This is such a multi-layered operation of all of the things that the swamp is being drained from. The military is draining the swamp right in front of you. And you have to go understand the origin. There's a blueprint that I've laid out. I'm the only one who has laid out the whole blueprint. There's a lot of good podcasters out there that have slivers of this and they're good with it. And they have portions of the directives. They have portions of the law, but they ain't got the full blueprint. There's a full massive blueprint that completely shows you we are in a continuity of government and there's a military occupancy going on and they are draining the swamp, baby. Drain, baby, drain. Donald John Trump, woo! Going down in history as the greatest president in the world.
Well, there you go. The greatest president in the world. And, well, that just might be. I have also seen, just between you, me, and the Goat Post, a similar style categorization of Vladimir Putin and how Putin will be revered around the world too in the future for some of the unbelievable work that he's been doing on humanity's behalf. So that's something. Let's have a look at Executive Order 13848. I've posted it up in the chat. If you care to go along and have a look at it, you can. I would commend this resource to you if you ever want to check an executive order from any president. The American Presidency Project presidency.ucsb.edu is the website. But if you just type in the American Presidency Project, I'm sure you'll find it. The search criteria in there are spectacular. You can nail it down through years, down to months if you want, and find exactly what was put together. I have referred to this particular executive order on a number of occasions, and okay, I'll read it out. I don't think it's terribly, maybe it is terribly long. But the guts of it, at the beginning, it says Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, find that the ability of persons located in whole or substantial part outside the United States to interfere in or undermine public confidence in United States elections, including through the unauthorized accessing of election and campaign infrastructure or the covert distribution of propaganda and disinformation, constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. Although there has been no evidence of a foreign power altering the outcome or vote tabulation in any United States election, foreign powers have historically sought to exploit America's free and open political system. In recent years, the proliferation of digital devices and internet-based communications has created significant vulnerabilities and magnified the scope and intensity of the threat of foreign interference, as illustrated in the 2017 Intelligence Community Assessment. I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with this threat. So, a national emergency is something that Congress has to deal with. Like Derek said, it can't be handed down for years, and on to consecutive presidents to figure out, even though the current president, old Sleepy Joe, has extended this and other executive orders until September this year. That's in his tenure, Joe Biden's tenure. He has extended Donald Trump's executive orders. So, what did he order? No later than 45 days after the conclusion of the United States election, the Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the heads of any other appropriate executive departments and agencies, shall conduct an assessment of any information indicating that a foreign government or any person acting as an agent of or on behalf of a foreign government has acted with the intent or purpose of interfering in that election. All right. This bit here. Shall conduct an assessment of any information indicating that a foreign government or any other person acting as an agent of or on behalf of a foreign government has acted with the intent or the purpose of interfering in that election. 2 words for you. Alexander Downer. Alexander Downer gets caught by that section right there. And so does Australia. Caught by that section there. It'll go on. You can, if you would choose, go and have a look at this all the way through. There's probably a week's worth of shows just in this document alone. It goes into any foreign interference. It explains what qualifies as foreign interference, which is a very, very broad term, and certainly what happened with our fishnet-clad private schoolboy falls into all of it. So I would highly recommend, rather than me having to read this through to you, I would commend that you go and look it up, grab the link out of the chats, and come through and have a bit of a look. Now, that executive order 13848, imposing certain sanctions in the event of foreign interference in a United States election. So, I think that has some significant, important questions that it raises, particularly for the Australian government of the day, and Alexander Downer's involvement in a great deal of that. So, no fun at all. Now, I did see that people are now saying hello to Camillo, but Camillo's other and much better half is in the room tonight. Hello, Tammy, gorgeous thing. Hope you're going well, Dale. And what was he off doing? Brushing the mustache or something? Keeps himself busy like that. Gracie, tell me, what's going on here? Lightning Ridge miners can't work in its peak season. Okay. I gather that's because of the floods, the rain that's happening down that way. That could be pretty disturbing. Obviously, if you happen to be an underground miner, as most of the guys in Lightning Ridge and Grawlin and all those sorts of places are, then you don't want your lease washed out, flooded, filled with shit. Take you weeks to pump that dry and make it weeks again before it's safe to go down in. And yeah, as you mentioned, it is the peak opal season at the moment. So really feeling for those guys down there in Lightning Ridge and that sort of part of the world. I do happen to know one of the guys down there, or I know a guy who knows a guy, one of the guys down there. So might see if I can get him on the phone if we can't get him on a computer and get a bit of an update. Maybe that would be quite interesting. So I'll reach out and see whether or not we can't make that happen. Certainly be an interesting life too, underground. I've got a friend in Coober Pedy, a very dear friend in Coober Pedy, and we're looking forward to going to Coober Pedy when we hit South Australia, if only just to go and have a look underground. Very excited around it. Yeah, Daniel's got the right idea, talking about flags and symbolism. Gold borders around the flags means controlled by foreign forces. Correct. You should also understand that when command and control infrastructure by the military is applied, that means continuation of government. Then there is no president. There is a commander-in-chief. The military have taken over by that stage, and as Derek explained, 17th of January 2017 is when the military effectively took over. Donald Trump was appointed president same day, I think, wasn't it? Was that the day of his initial inauguration? I mean, the 2016 election happened in the November, but he didn't get inaugurated until, I think, the 17th, and it happened that day. So that in itself is reasonably significant. That meant the military was in control for the entire Trump presidency. He was simply the commander-in-chief, acting out a role. When we say it's been a movie, it's really been a movie. A lot of things that we assume we have seen have absolutely no basis in truth or fact. And that comes from both sides, but that has been necessary because we are playing in a war that some people don't even believe exists. It is a hidden war. It is as much an information war as it is a shooting war. And what we do with the Voice of Freedom, what you do on your social media sites, sharing, if I should have something worth sharing, or if others do, we are on the coalface of the war. We are fighting the information war, and we are winning. Alternative media are beginning to win. You can tell now mainstream media are almost embarrassed beyond belief that they are still telling the lies they are. Ross Coulthard, Australian journalist of some note, is going to be breaking a huge story in the coming days regarding UFOs. He is the fellow who interviewed that very senior intelligence officer from the US who knows that there are retrieval teams around the world picking up bits and pieces of UFOs. He also knows a lot more about that this officer didn't tell him. The only problem I have with the story that Ross is putting, or the way that the story of this officer is being portrayed, is that he hasn't seen any of what he is reporting as a whistleblower to be fact with his own eyes. He's only heard it from people who have seen it, so once removed. And I don't know that that's any more reliable than anything else. Do your own research. That is the key. No, I don't think COG could have been involved, Adam, from 9/11, because the deep state organized 9/11. Bush was in control of it as from the presidency, and the military didn't trust the Bushes for good reason, obviously. They were quite intent. Obviously, George W. Had no idea that his father, George Sr., was telling the White Hats everything. The only time that they all found out that George Sr. had rolled over on everybody was at the funeral and if you haven't seen it, it is some of the best vision you'll ever see. The Obamas, the Clintons, the Bidens, many others gathered around in the front rows of the pews at church at this funeral service for Bush Sr. And they open up the order of service documents they've been given, and out falls an envelope. And on that envelope is written, because somebody was smart enough to take a picture of it, is "They know it all. I'm sorry." And he certainly told them everything. So, yes, the look on the Bush's faces, that is made aware, particularly to Jed Bush, who's got his hand on his heart at the time. His dad's being wheeled out of the church or carried out of the church. And he sees that and just his hand drops, his face drops, everything drops. He knows the jig's up. So, no, I don't think continuity of government could have been involved from 9/11. I think they might have been ready for something like that, but they would have had to have taken out the entire government. 9/11 was the day they were planning on announcing a new gold standard, a new gold asset-backed gold reserve for the US dollar. And all that gold got stolen out of Building 7, which fell over by itself some hours after no planes hit it. So there you go. All interwoven, but for different reasons. Yep, they have groomed us for UFOs forever, Jinder Lee. Couldn't agree with you more. Will the UFOs we see be real, or will they be CGI effects? Could be a bit of both. Will they be real extraterrestrial vehicles, or will they be real vehicles that are man-made, human-made? Because we have had over 6,000 patents held back from public knowledge that the military have had plenty of access to. And that includes all sorts of different transport technologies and ways of powering devices like cars, jets, planes, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, going to be interesting, and I believe we're up for some disclosure about that in the near future. Have you noticed a large prevalence of copper wire wrapped around a bit of wood or bamboo shoved into your ground tutorials going on at the moment? Talking about gaining electricity from the ether that puts that electricity into the ground, keeps the bugs away from whatever it is you're trying to grow, and helps whatever you're growing, grow more of it, grow bigger, grow better, grow more juicy. It's been a trick, been around for years, ages. As long as I can remember, my grandmother used to use it in certain parts of the garden. I never just used to think it was one of those old wives' tales the grandmother tells you about. But now, coming back into full swing, and there is definite science behind it all. So I don't suggest you to go out and start robbing people of copper wire, or copper tubing. But get yourself some copper wire or a good galvanized wire. I believe that will work as well, because it will conduct electricity. And wrap it around a couple of sticks in the garden, plant them, and see what comes up. Might be a very interesting experiment. There were a couple of things I wanted to show you tonight. Did mention about the New York Times. This is a concerning story coming out of Queensland. Around the Caboolture Shire area, a first responder who has been a first responder in that area for 15 years and has lived in the area for 22 has given his opinion based on local experiences in this area. Many crashes, rollovers, and fatal accidents around the Morayfield, Burpengary, Narangba, and Caboolture areas. On that stretch of road, all of the accidents are at those 2 points where there are 2 5G towers together. 99% of the crashes that happen in this area, many fatal, have occurred within 50 to 100 meters of the twin 5G towers in this area. The Bruce Highway, both northbound and southbound, has never been part of such devastation in previous years. I know that bit of road pretty well, travel on it very, very, very regularly. And yes, there are always accidents along that bit of road. Sometimes anybody traveling regularly on a weekday, more particularly a weekend going up to the Sunshine Coast or coming back, knows just how painful that 1 hour, 15-minute drive can be. It can turn into a 4 or 5 hour marathon for a variety of reasons. And obviously, by the time you get to the crash site, it's all gone. There's nothing left. Pardon me, I thought I'd save you that cough. So, yeah, if you're living around that area, you might take a bit of a look. Be aware of what's going on. That's in the Morayfield, Burpengary, Narangba and Caboolture area, just north of Brisbane, and not very nice. And, of course, the last thing I wanted to share with you tonight was something that I found, well, gave me a smile, but also reinforced a lot of truth. There are 3 types of people right now on the earth. Those too brainwashed and or in denial to even be able to comprehend that this isn't really happening. Those who understand what is happening but are too afraid to voice what they know for fear of judgment. And the third group, those that understand and are willing to fight for their freedom and put themselves through ridicule in order to not only save themselves, but the entire planet. That's you, folks. Congratulations. Thank you for being part of the team. The world thanks you for being part of the team. And I thank you for being part, particularly, of the Voice of Freedom team. We would find it almost impossible to do things without you. And for that reason, we want to give a little bit of it back. So you can win a 10-ounce bar of solid silver, all thanks to our mates at Ainslie Bullion. All you got to do is write a limerick. Now, Vince called me just before the start of tonight's show. The website is now live. So if you wish to go to the website and check it out, let me just see if I can bring it up here. There you go. Yep, right. I'll bring it up. So go to the website. I'll pull that down, and I might need to move that up there where I can see it myself. So the contest is open. All you need to do is go to vofhq.com and you will see up here members contest. The terms and conditions are there for you to check out. There is a limerick example and how to enter. Please make sure that you check it all out. And to enter, you must be a member of Voice of Freedom. If you're not already a member, we'd love to have you. Go to vofhq.com and hit the membership button. It'll take you through. You can be a member for as little as $1.25 a week, and all entries up to the 30th of June, all members received between now and the 30th of June, and all prior memberships will go in the draw to or be eligible to enter to win the bar of silver and one of 3 1-ounce coins, thanks to Freedom Financial Solutions, as runners-up prizes. But you have to be able to come up with a limerick. I'm going to show you mine again. A city of face masks and heathens, coerced and berated by leaders, but the people fought back against the medical hacks and found strength in their voice of freedom. There have been a couple of entries already in the limerick competition at the Voice of Freedom site. You can go online there and see them too. Well, by all means, I don't think it'll be hard to do one better than me. Control of your wealth is key. Invest wisely with advice and see. Be it silver or gold, you are bound to behold. Control of your wealth via Ainslie. And finally, Ainslie Bullion will give a good rate if you're buying or selling some weight. But some silver or gold or that platinum billfold, Aussie Bullion is best for you, mate. Oh, Ainslie Bullion. Jeez, I buggered that one up. That didn't help. Shoot me. At any rate, Ainslie Bullion, great folks if you're looking to get into gold or silver, and you can find them in Melbourne or Sydney. There are plenty of other dealers around, but not any of them are giving us 10 ounces of silver to give away to you if you are any good at writing a limerick. So the way it's going to work, folks, is you can write 3 limericks if you like, and you will at least be in the chance to win a share of everything. The 10-ounce silver bar prize will go to the overall judged best limerick. We will then give away one of the silver coins to what we judge to be the best limerick using one of those 3 examples. So I'll bring that up for you again. Voice of Freedom being the first example, Ainslie or Ainslie Bullion being the second example, and Freedom Financial Solutions. If you choose to include or do one for each, then good luck to you. You'll have 3 chances to get in and win 4 prizes. I don't know if that really works that way, but you'll be in with a chance regardless. So very happy to have you come and join our team. Of course, everything you do to support us goes to support others as well here at the Voice of Freedom. And we can't do this without your help. If you don't want to become a member and have your chance at the silver, but would still like to help, then please, you can donate at vofhq.com as well. There is an easy donate button there. And I can tell you it will be very gratefully received. Telstra will love you for it because I've got to pay some phone bills. Amongst other shit, isn't it? Well, I'm not going to complain about it because we're all facing huge bill payments at the moment. And I am certainly not out there on my Jack Malone for that. I did talk about people last night who are having such a problem paying their mortgages now. My housemate's mortgage here, for instance, has gone up exactly double since April last year. And I'm sure that this mortgage is not dissimilar to your mortgage if you're having it. So it is a crime what they're doing to us at the moment. And I think part of it is being done to try and wake up as many normies as possible by shaking them awake. And maybe shaking them awake isn't going to happen until they're homeless, when they can't afford to keep their house anymore, and then they get thrown out of it and have to try and find a rental. Good luck with that when we're competing with the masses, the tens of thousands of Australians who sleep rough on the streets every night now, and we're going to bring in another 750,000 of them next year. All I can say is I sincerely hope the government doesn't give any of them licenses, because I'm pretty much guaranteed most of them will be dickheads.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's rock!